Hey there, Margie Bryce here, bringing you the Crabby Pastor podcast. And I don't think you're going to be too surprised to know that it's too easy today to become the Crabby Pastor. Our time together will give you food for thought to help you be the ministry leader fully surrendered to God's purposes and living into whatever it takes to get you there and keep you there. So we're talking about sustainability in ministry. So I recently met with my coach, and yes, all good coaches have coaches. So we just believe in the process and the help and the benefit that it is. Anyway, I was just feeling itchy about how my ministry is going and what I feel like I should be doing. And I wanted to think out loud on that. I wanted to unpack that some. So I had a session. And then my coach ended our session and said, I'm taking my coaching hat off. And she said if I was interested, she'd like to explore why I feel the pressure and the need to be doing something to press my ministry forward. And that, push mentality that I have. And where that comes from, which, most likely is family of origin stuff, no doubt. Which, I do know the family of origin issues, the ones that I carry anyway, and why I do what I do. For the record, this is not to say that there was something wrong with my family of origin, but rather how I interpreted my experience and then how every now and then it impacts how I approach and do life today. Isn't that lovely? And it just never goes away. You're like, oh my goodness, there it is again. And the interesting ring-a-ding-ding thing here is it's the exact polar opposite of what I like to say to people. And I mean this with all my heart when I say, just be faithful and obedient with the day, and that's good enough. The good enough part speaks to the heart of, overfunctioners, especially those of us who are perfectionists. Just be faithful and obedient with the day. That's good enough. We all should go and listen and adhere to our own sermons, right? Right. So, yeah, I have family of origin stuff. All of us do. But also, this North American culture is pretty push. And it pushes us to push ourselves. And I'm working hard to push back on that. I just don't see Jesus living that push lifestyle. Jesus seems more moderately paced, Even if you read the book of Mark, which has a pretty quick pace, and it tends to feel like you're zipping away, not so with Jesus. So I did come away from my coaching session, though, seeing that I am working my way from the push lifestyle and into a slower pace, a Jesus pace. I'm in a transition, and transitions are challenging. And I guess I'm kind of dragging you along with me if you allow. So, share this with anyone else that you think also needs to slow down, and we shall all journey together with this. I mean, isn't it ironic that this slow down theme for this podcast is coming right smack dab in the middle of one of our busier seasons? Okay, I'm going to say busiest. Of the two high holy holidays, Christmas and Easter, well, the jaunt from Thanksgiving to Christmas time frame actually wins the prize. And for some reason, mostly, but not all the time, it's women who tend to, make Christmas happen for their families. The planning and the gatherings and the events and the shopping. And then you maybe are in ministry if you're female and certainly male, but it's what? Planning and special gatherings and events and extra worship services. All that to help make Christmas happen in the lives of those we lead. Especially for some women, it can be a real double whammy. And I had the nerve, and I still have the nerve, I guess, to talk about slowing down. Yep. And I had a good friend call me out a bit. She was very nice on social media where I posted one of the podcasts about slowing down, and she's a mom, she's a student, she is a ministry leader, and she has plenty of deadlines of completion to pay attention to, no doubt. Well, in all honesty, I strongly believe in self-care for ministry leaders and anyone who is helping to support and encourage other people. To say it's been a rough couple of years is an understatement. And here it comes. Ta-da! Our first Thanksgiving/Christmas season with some freedom from COVID, a bit, some anyway, compared to the last 2 years for sure. And I'm talking about slowing down. We did seem to do better at that during COVID, didn't we? Well, slowing down is about leading the one person on the planet over whom you have a lot of sway, and that is your own self. It's about how we are doing life, the pace of our life. The things we do in our life is our load. So, you take your load, that long laundry list of things to be done, you carry those, even the things that aren't due for 6 months, and it gets heavy. But then when you're moving fast in response to the push with a long load, with a long laundry list or load, well, that's just a recipe for burnout, actually, is one thing. So yeah, I'm saying I want to show up with patience and grace as opposed to being crabby. And in all honesty, while I've shown up smiling, underneath, I've been crabby about having to do all that I wanted to get done. I've even thought it would be okay if Christmas came every other year, and that would work for me because, technically every day is Christmas for those who follow Christ, right? And I've preached that. I've said that. So is Easter's every day too. But there is indeed a hint of crabbiness underneath. Well, okay, I could do Christmas every other year. And I don't really want to do life crabby style. And that's because I'm positive that Jesus didn't do life like that. I'm always multitasking. Many women do that really well. Some guys do too. But in this season, I've been working in my glass workshop, and there's some projects on the website in the gallery, the glass gallery. So you can kind of see that if you're curious, or Bryce Glass Art on Facebook. So I'm working in the glass workshop right now. I have a show in December. I'm working on getting an inventory to sell. So then also I'm working away on this podcast, and I'm doing some coaching, and I'm doing some self-care, and I do a little bit. I'm finishing up some projects with a team where I am just the project manager for some instructional design. And I think I've bought maybe 1 or 2 Christmas gifts. I haven't even yet created my Christmas list so that I can get a handle on what I'm doing because, I'm a planner and I prefer not to just wing it. Pardon the Christmas pun there. Thanksgiving pun. Anyway, this podcast episode drops after Thanksgiving, but just know I didn't get my head in the game for Thanksgiving until about like a week before Thanksgiving. And, there was a reason for that. And I want to share the story with you. But part of the reason I didn't focus so much on Thanksgiving is because I went out of town to visit my 90-year-old dad who lives in Arizona. So, reminder, I'm in Michigan. That's a 2-hour time difference, just for the record. The idea of the trip kind of consumed me for several weeks, in part because I let it, I have to be responsible, right? And my goal was to have all 3 of us sisters get together and visit my dad at the same time. So that became the task. And I had it all set up. Flight, Airbnb, coordinating with my sisters who live on the East Coast. And a couple days after the Airbnb could be canceled, everything fell apart. One sister ended up having surgery, and the other one had a close family member in the hospital, and then someone in her household tested positive for COVID and the flu. So now I'm down to one. Fortunately, my oldest son offered to come with me, which was a lifesaver. He was a great help, and that is a massive understatement. My dad and his wife are both really slowed down people in their 90s, okay? My dad in particular has stayed intentionally firmly affixed in the early 20th century. No smartphone, no internet, and I'm not advocating that necessarily, but perhaps you need to unplug for a bit. Just asking while I'm on the way in this story. But maybe that's one way you could push back on the push, push, push of this season. So every little bit helps, right? And again, this is about leading yourself well. This is an aspect of self-care as well. The first line of leadership is leading yourself. I like to quote James Clear on this one. He's an author, jamesclear.com. And he says, basically, I'll paraphrase it for you, making a daily 1% improvement helps you make tremendous progress over a year, while actually doing nothing, you actually begin to decline from where you are. So every little bit does help. And the visit, though, with my dad showed me a couple of things, besides the fact that I don't do well in an 85-degree home. But more importantly, and most importantly, this was a lesson in slowing down so I can be present. If you are living into the push, push, push mentality, it's really hard to be present in the moment. And sometimes technology prevents us from being present in the moment. And if you aren't present in the moment, you miss things. You don't realize you miss things, but you do miss things. And some of those are important. And while I was visiting, I learned it's harder to slow down than you think. It takes intentionality. Imagine that. You have to be intentional to slow down. You have to lead yourself well. Anyway, my dad is basically housebound. He doesn't get out much. And if my son weren't with me, we would not have gone out. But since he was, we took him out for a bit. The goal was to go to two places, to go to his church and then the grocery store. So my dad is a practicing Catholic, and their church just built a new $7 million building, and he wanted me to see it. Fortunately for me, I was able to slow down enough the day before and be present in the moment to hear that he, my dad, was no longer receiving communion in his home. Now, this is going to be really interesting for theologically here. So just hang with me. But I know some of you might be interested in hearing this, but my 90-year-old dad had a theological dispute with the Eucharistic minister who was bringing him communion. And of all ironies, my dad has served as a Eucharistic minister. He was one after having received communion while he was in the hospital once. And that experience was just so meaningful to him that, he did what you need to do to be able to offer that to other people. So he did become a Eucharistic minister. So the Eucharistic minister, say that 3 times fast, comes to my dad's home, and he asks this housebound 90-year-old when he has been to confession last. And of all times for my dad to offer a Protestant position, I couldn't believe he said this. My dad told him that he could confess to Jesus, his Savior. Well, that was the end of in-home communion for him, in part because of this theological dispute, and in part because my dad no longer advocates for himself as a 90-year-old. You'd think, we'll just call the church and say what happened and whatever, but he just didn't. But I still knew communion was important to him. In a previous decade of his life, in his 80s, he probably would have written a letter. That was his main form of dissent. But those days of him doing that are apparently now gone. Now, I was thinking, Dad, I could hook you up with communion, right? But I think he would be having none of that Protestant communion anyways. So I just didn't do that. But I was thinking, when we visit that church tomorrow, I'm fixing this. I can do that. Which, if I'd have been distracted looking at my phone, and when you're sitting and doing not a lot for a lengthy period of time, it's awful tempting. Or I could have been writing lists, my Christmas list, or the 50 things I need to get done when I get home. If I had not been slowed down enough to be fully present in that moment, I might have just missed this opportunity. So, we get to the church, and I head to the office while my dad and son head very slowly to the sanctuary, very slowly. It didn't take me long, less than 2 minutes, to describe the situation, and not throw anybody under the bus as I was doing it, but just to describe the situation. And they so very graciously said they would fix it. They would send someone else out there. Good. So then I got back to my son and my dad. We finished touring the beautiful church there. It was lovely. A day after I got home, Dad called, and he said the church wanted to bring communion out there for him. And so, yeah, I was pleased at that. And he was thankful, because I think he kind of knew that I did something while he was headed to the sanctuary. And then he said to me, guess what the person's name is that's bringing out the communion? And I guessed the name of his sister, who actually was a nun for more than 60 years, Nope, he said. He said it's Margaret. So I guess Margaret is serving up communion after all, which I thought was hysterically funny. And just, my former spiritual director would say, God, he's such a funny guy. She would always say that like that. God has such a sense of humor. And I thought, yeah, boy. Just a confirmation, just something that God knew I would really chuckle about and be tickled with. So besides the fact that he's getting the in-home communion again. So sometimes God leaves you with lessons on yourself, for you to ponder. But God doesn't leave you there to ponder so you feel badly about yourself. And it's not that I've never done that, but I try not to. But this is discipline. And discipline is training. Discipline is learning. And Scripture says God disciplines those God loves. So I'm transitioning to lean into a slower pace of life, and that is part of self-care. And working to lean into a slower pace of life is an act of leading myself in a good way. So one question for all of us at the start of this busy Advent season: what are some ways you can slow down to be sure that you are present in the moment to those around you? It could be family, friends, people in your congregation. What are some ways you can slow down a bit to be present in the moment to others? And then I'm going to leave us with another pair of questions just to, keep you up at night or help you ruminate further. Is it that God shows up when we slow down? Or is it that we notice God is showing up when we slow down? Here are some blessings for you on your Advent season as you lead others closer to Jesus. Hey, thanks for listening. It is my deep desire and passion to champion issues of sustainability in ministry and for your life. So I'm here to help. I stepped back from pastoral ministry, and I feel called to help ministry leaders create and cultivate sustainability in their lives so that they can go the distance with God and whatever plans that God has for you. I would love to help. I would consider it an honor. And in all things, make sure you connect to these sustainability practices, so that you don't become the crabby pastor.